he breathed his last. The Lord chose the last breath. He yielded up the Spirit. And then his soul could no more suffer from pain coming from the body. It was over. It was also over for Dismas, the good thief, who had heard these consoling words, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And these souls moved on towards light. Although the descent into the underworld would seem to be a descent into an obscure area where the just were waiting. The beautiful homily read on Holy Saturday by the Church in its liturgy reminds us of the way in which the trophies, the wounds, were shown to a waiting Adam. What was lost in a garden was retrieved in a garden. And the Lord pulled Adam up from the prison of a semi-obscurity. The third soul to leave at that point, the soul of the other one crucified, who had died in bitterness and rejection of grace, it would seem went in a very different direction. Not semi-obscurity, but complete and irreversible and everlasting obscurity. That point, the full stop of the last breath, is of cosmic importance. The soul never returns. We hear it not, but it then hears all. The soul no longer perceives through the senses of the body, but in its independence, now proven by science, perceives directly all, and with no distraction feels bliss or pain head on, forever. Many have asked, what is the transition like? Where do they go? Some answers have come back. In the 80s, it would have been around about 1982, I spent weeks translating the Purgatory manuscript. This nun who had died without preparation and had not collaborated with the graces of the life that she was living came back after a couple of years asking for help from the very one, the other nun who would try to help her and warn her. And as she was being purified, she was able to answer questions, and these answers are interesting. How far is it from the world in which we live to Purgatory? Purgatory is in the centre of the globe. Isn't the world itself a purgatory? Of those who live in it, some do it entirely, while still there, through voluntary or accepted penance. These go, after death, immediately to heaven. Others begin it there, because the world is a veritable place of suffering. But these souls, lacking as they are the generosity which is needed, will have to finish off their earthly purgatory in the real one. Deaths that are sudden and unforeseen, are they acts of God's justice or of His mercy? Deaths of this sort are sometimes an act of justice and sometimes an act of mercy. when the soul is of a worrying nature, and God knows that it is prepared and ready to appear before him, in order to spare it the frights it might have at the final moment, he withdraws it from this world by a sudden death. And at other times, God takes souls away in his justice. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're utterly lost, but deprived as they are of the last sacraments, or having received them hastily, without having prepared themselves for the last crossing, their purgatory is considerably more painful and goes on for a longer time. Others, having reached the very limit with their crimes and remained deaf to every single God-given grace, are removed from the world. God takes them off, lest they excite his vengeance even further. That actually is quite frightening. How many people die now in that way? It is not our business to judge, but it is certainly our business to think. And never should we ourselves get into a car without a prayer and without making sure that we're ready to end the journey, not in time, but in eternity. That hit me very strongly the other day when I had a blowout and was out of control, and the car at high speed was propelled from side to side, hitting everything and being propelled into the air, going over the barrier and coming to rest on the grass. If it weren't for angelic protection, I would have been catapulted just like that into eternity. And then, what about this pain? How can the soul suffer? And what does it suffer? The fire of purgatory, is it a fire like the one we know on earth? Yes, only with the difference that the fire of purgatory is a purifier that has to do with the justice of God, and that of the earth, nice and gentle compared with purgatories. It's but a shadow beside the great braziers of divine justice. But how on earth can a soul burn anyway? By a just permission of God. The soul, that is, the guilty partner, since all the body did was obey, and what malice do you ever see shown to a dead body? The soul suffers as though it were the body that suffered. Tell me, what takes place during the last agony and in the time that follows? Does the soul find itself in the light or in darkness? Under what form is the sentence pronounced? I had no agony, as you know, but I am able to tell you that at this last decisive moment, the devil lets out all his fury on the dying. In order to give souls greater merit, God allows them to undergo these last hours of testing, these last battles. Strong and generous souls, so that they may have a yet more glorious place in heaven, often have, at life's end, and during the pangs of death, taste of these terrible fights against the angel of darkness. You yourself have been a witness to the fact, but they come through it victoriously. God doesn't allow a soul who has been faithful to him throughout her life to be lost in these final moments. those who have loved the Blessed Virgin, who have invoked her all through their lives, receive many graces from her during the lost struggles. The same is true of those who have been devoted to St. Joseph, St. Michael, or some other saint. It is then, as I have said to you already, that one is glad to have an intercessor before God in this painful moment. There are souls who die in peace without experiencing anything of what I've just described. The good Lord has his designs in everything. He does or permits everything for the particular good of each. How am I to tell you and describe to you what takes place after the agony? It isn't possible to understand it properly without having gone through it. I'll try nevertheless to explain it to you as best I can. The soul, as it leaves its body, has a feeling of being utterly bewildered, completely besieged, if I may so speak, by God. It finds itself in such lucidity that in the twinkling of an eye it perceives its whole life, and, in accordance with what it sees, what it deserves. It's the soul itself that, in the midst of such a clear sight, pronounces its own sentence. It does not see God, but is annihilated by his presence. If it is a guilty soul, as was my own case, and in consequence has merited purgatory, it is so crushed down by the weight of its faults still remaining to be effaced, that it plunges itself of its own accord into purgatory. It is then, and then only, that one understands God, his love for souls, and how wretched sin is in the eyes of his divine majesty. St. Michael is there when the soul leaves the body. It is him alone that I saw, and that all souls see. He is, as it were, the witness and the executioner of divine justice. I also saw my guardian angel. All this is to help you to understand how it is that it can be said that St. Michael carries our souls to purgatory, because a soul can't be carried. Yet nonetheless it's true, inasmuch as he is there, present at the execution of the sentence. All that goes on in the other world is a mystery for yours. And when it's a soul that is to go straight to heaven, for this soul, its union begun with Jesus just goes on at death. That's why heaven is. That's what heaven is, but heaven's union is far more intimate than earth's. The big issue then is what the soul has chosen with regard to grace. It can be removed if it's going to get worse and worse and worse by a sudden death. Because there are degrees also of suffering in damnation. God does not want the maximum each time. At the same period, I came across that other terrible bit of writing, where this time it was Germany, a soul didn't make it, and by the mercy of God was allowed for our sakes, to make it known. And why? And by the way, this same soul has come out in exorcism in more recent times as a human demon. And so it is in the autumn of 1937 that this happens. The one who is alive, who by the way becomes soon afterwards a nun, but dies very young, and leaves this testimony among her papers. It was unknown at the time, but it was discovered after her death. And she had this communication from the beyond. Claire, you can stop praying for me. I'm damned. If I let you know it and expatiate on the matter at some length, don't imagine that it is in any way on the score of friendship. We who are here have no more love for anyone. I do so as though constrained to do good, because I am on the side of that power that always wills evil but does good. The truth is that I would like to see you ending in this state in which I have cast my anchor forever. Don't be surprised at this intention. Here, this is how we all think. Our will is fixed in evil, or at least in what you people call evil. Thus it is that when we do something good, as I am right now, in opening your eyes on hell, none of that proceeds from good intentions. So it goes on. It would seem that she was given a last pull. It was on a Sunday morning. She heard this pull in the depths of her conscience. You could perhaps go to church one last time. And this, no, let's be finished with this. I bear the consequences forever. Came from her own depths. Later that day, this car came across the horizon at high speed. Her husband lost control, and she awoke on the other side with that no still resounding. Had I never been born? That sounds like an echo of Judas. Could I now be annihilated and escape from these torments? No will could be as strong as the one with which I would relinquish my existence, like clothing made of ashes, to be scattered in the void. But I have to exist. I have to exist as I was made, with a truncated existence. So it goes on. And the last point is tragic. It's strange that in the course of that same morning, this thought had once more come to my mind, quite inexplicably. You could go one more time to Mars. It resounded within me like an imploration. Categorically and resonantly, my no cut short the thread of my thoughts. With all these things we must be finished once and for all. Let me bear all the weight of any consequences there may be. Now I'm carrying the things that happened after my death. You know them already. My husband's fate, my mother's, what happened to my corpse, and the way the funeral ran. All these I knew by means of the natural perceptions that we have here. As for what happens upon earth, we have a vague sort of knowledge of it. But the things that in some way concern us directly, these we know. Thus, I can see right now where you are staying. As for me, at the moment of my death, I woke suddenly out of the fog. I found myself as though flooded by a dazzling light. I was on the very spot on which my corpse was lying. It was as it happens in the theatre, when in one go all the lights go out, leaving nothing to be seen but the stage. The curtains separate with a great din and open on an unexpected scene. Horribly luminous, the scene of my life. As though in a great mirror, my soul showed itself to itself. The graces spurned from my early days right up to the last no in God's face. I felt like an assassin who during a judicial prosecution has just been presented with his lifeless victim. Repent? Never. Be ashamed? Never. And yet, neither could I resist under the eyes of God, whom I had rejected. One thing alone was left to me. Escape! As Cain, who by the way has also appeared in Exorcism recently, as Cain ran away from the corpse of his brother Abel, even so was my soul repelled outside, far away from this horrid sight. It was the particular judgment. The invisible judge was saying, depart from me. Then my soul, like a shadow, coated with brimstone, threw itself into everlasting torment. It need never have been. The agony that the Lord felt in the garden on Thursday night was partly so terrible because of the sight of so many souls that would say no, and for which the cross and passion would be completely